Hi, I'm Ronnie Ledrew, and you're watching a podcast where nostalgia comes alive. It's Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. Roll it!
Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, the podcast where nostalgia comes alive. Since July of 2021, Jake and his friends have interviewed professionals in the worlds of acting, directing, writing, puppeteering, and many more. Who will they be chatting with in this week's interview? Find out in this Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. Happy you're here with us. Thank you for joining us. As always, I'm your host, Jake Duffenbaugh. With me today, as always, our co-host, Chris Bixby. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. How are you, Jake?
Doing great, Chris. Thank you for asking. And to those who are wondering where our another co-host, Matt Bingle, no worries, he'll be here. It's just he'll be here a little bit a few minutes late. But yeah, I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you for asking.
That's wonderful. Who do we have for today?
Today's guest we have for today, he's an English actor, puppeteer, producer, and director, and lots of sort of things. Some of you may know his work from being involved in some Henson things that we'll be discussing later, as well as some Muppet films, and of course he's a part of a London production of Avenue Q, and a lot more others that we'll touch base more on in his career later on. Please welcome Mr. Nigel Plaskitt. How about you here, Nigel? How are you?
Hello. Yeah, fine. Thank you. Very good here. Yeah. It's a good day. The sun has been shining here, so that's always good at this time of year.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you here. So, to kick things off, we know who you are, but for those who don't, would you care to tell our audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. Well, essentially, I'm a puppeteer on mainly TV and theatre. I have started out as being an actor. Then I got a job fairly quickly doing a TV puppet show. And I can explain in detail a bit about that later. But that kind of set me on the road to doing puppets and TV. And so most of my work has been, well, certainly since about 1981, has been with puppets on TV and in the theatre and film. So before that, I was doing some acting as well alongside the puppet jobs that I did. So that's kind of my background.
Nice.
And
Nice, absolutely. That's wonderful. So, what was your childhood like, and how did you grow up like before getting into acting and puppetry?
well, I was always a kid that used to produce plays in my living room, with my cousins. We'd hang washing lines across the living room and put curtains up and do all that stuff. And then we would do little plays for each other. So I was always kind of performing ever since I was quite young, probably since about sort of 7 or 8 years old. And then somebody bought me a puppet, what they were called Pelham puppets, which were string puppets. And they were toys, really. But somebody bought me one of those, I think, for Christmas, probably. And I suddenly realized that if I did shows with puppets, I could do everything myself. I could do all the voices. I could do all the characters. I could do everything. I became a kind of megalomaniac. And I realized that I would be totally in control. So that's kind of what started me on that. So I was doing that, doing little shows again around, local places. And then I got a little run in the libraries. And through the libraries, when I was I suppose about 12 or 13, I met Ronnie Ledrew, who I think you've already spoken to.
Yeah.
And
Yes, we
so
did.
he's a couple of years older than me. So he was about 13 or 14, and I think I was about 11 or 12. Anyway, cut a long story short, he started working at the Little Angel Theatre, which is a puppet theatre here in London. And at the age of about 13, he got me into working there in my school holidays and at weekends. So I would travel down from my home, which was in North London, into Islington, which is where the Little Angel is. And I performed there with him over a period for about 4 or 5 years, perhaps. And then I stopped with puppets altogether when I was about 20 and started doing some acting. But pretty soon, someone I met when I was working at the Little Angel phoned me up and said they recognized that I did character voices. They'd seen some character voices I've been doing at Little Angel. So could I try for this TV series that her husband was designing? He was the set designer. So I said yes, and I went to what was turned out to be an audition, but actually was an interview. And the guy who was producing and directing said, "Can you do puppets and can you do character voices?" I said yes, and he said, "Okay, you got the job." I didn't even have to do any. And I was very lucky. I walked into it, that one, and that kind of started me off. We made this show at Elstree Studios, which were just north of London. And while we were shooting it, this is the 1970s now, about 1975, the Jim Henson Company moved into the next stage to shoot the Muppet Show. So they were literally shooting on the next stage to us. And this gave me the chance to go in frequently and watch what they were doing, so that was a great learning process for me, not to mention a lot of fun watching all the stuff that they were doing. So that's kind of where I started working for the Henson Company. And I didn't start working for them, but I got to know them. I got to know the guys that were working. So particularly Richard Hunt, who used to come into our studio and make a lot of noise, and everyone knew when Richard was around. So I did get to know Richard quite a bit, and one or two of the others I kind of knew, and Louise Gold. Do you know Louise?
Oh
Love
yeah, I love
Louise.
Louise. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Louise,
She's great.
who features a lot later in my life, she was working there, and you could also hear Louise. I think she and Richard were competing for the loudest performers on the site, and they were. But you could always hear Louise coming. But yeah, so that's where I kind of bumped into them, and later on began to work for them. That went on a bit, didn't it? But it kind of covers about 30 years.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I'm kind of curious. Do you remember your very first acting job?
Yeah, the very first one I did was for a producer called Bill Kenwright, who's just recently passed away in London. He's been a very big producer in the theatre in London. And I did a play called Conduct Unbecoming. It was on tour, and I toured it off and on for about a year in the UK. So it was one of his first productions. He hadn't done very much before that, and this was a big play that had been in the West End. He had bought the rights and the set to take it on tour, and we toured the show for a year, and it was a huge success. We sold out almost everywhere we went. So that was extraordinary. It was a play about the Indian Army, and it was a thriller. So that was the very first acting job I did, and that was just before I started doing Pipkins, because I got back off that. And that was when I got approached to do Pipkins, which was the kids show that I was doing, which I told you about earlier. And I think at the same time, I did a series of commercials. This is when I started doing the Pipkins, which was 1972. I did a series of very high-profile commercials where I got to be very well recognized in this country. And jumping forward to 10 years, which is how long the commercials ran for, which is an extraordinary length of time for a commercial. It really got wanting to be famous out of my system, because nobody would leave you alone. Every time they saw you in the street, or they'd all be shouting out the catchphrases from the commercial, or you'd be having a quiet dinner with someone and they'd be asking you to sign a beer mat or something like that. So I really kind of realized that's probably not what I wanted to be, to have too much recognition. And then I started, and I'd been doing the puppets, and I began to realize that it was a very good niche that I could carve for myself in this country, and later abroad.
Awesome. So now, one of your earliest acting roles was playing Mason in the 1976 film Spy Story. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, not a part I ever saw myself playing a secret agent, which is what I was. It was a kind of a low budget production, but Michael Caine had done the previous films. I think it was
Yeah.
Michael Caine, by the same author, which was Len Dayton, and so he'd done a series of 2 or 3 films, I think, really about the Cold War, and this was about the Cold War too. It was a kind of low budget film, and it was really confusing for me. I read the script and I didn't even really know what was going on half the time. But I didn't have, I played the part and we shot on location, nearly everything on location, actually. I think it was all on location. And at the end, when they cut the film together, the director came back to me and said, "We've got to put a scene in at the beginning because it's too confusing. Nobody knows what's going on. So you've got to shoot another scene explaining what's about to happen." So I went back and did that scene opposite the Houses of Parliament on the River Thames. We shot that. So yeah, that was my kind of first film role apart from the commercial. So that was the first time I've been in front of the camera. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. So what was it like playing Corporal Klein in Owner Occupied?
Well, that was a sitcom. It was a pilot for a sitcom. It was going to be a series, and it was about the occupation of Jersey during the Second World War. And I know it's kind of a weird thing for a comedy, but anyway, I was playing a Nazi. Again, not a role I've ever seen myself in, but anyway, it was a kind of light-hearted thing, and it was we only made 1 episode though, sadly, because at the same time they had started doing a drama series about the same subject, and they won because they actually got the series commissioned and they were doing it before. Well, we'd only made the pilot, but it was a lot of fun doing it, and some nice English actors whom I'd respected, much older than myself, playing the other roles. So that was good. That was good to do that.
Nice. And you also got to play I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Unstoffe on Doctor Who.
Yeah, yeah. I did 4 episodes of Doctor Who. Do you know Doctor Who?
Yeah, it's I have a
Yeah,
couple
yeah, I've heard about it. Yeah,
uh,
I've heard it's a wonderful show.
It
yeah,
has quite a following
long
in
running show. I have a couple friends who are fans of it as well.
yeah. There's there's quite a following in North America, I think.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, I played a kind. He was a con man, and I was playing a con man who was going around the universe selling planets that I didn't own. And it wasn't just me; we were kind of working in a couple. It was Ian Cuthbertson and myself were playing 2 con men, and I was the kind of young one who he was teaching how to play the game and to con people out of money. And it was I mean, Doctor Who was known for its kind of weird monsters and robots and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't an episode with a lot of that in. It was much more of a well-written script, and a bit of comedy going on. So and Tom Baker was playing the Doctor at the time because there've been several incarnations of the Doctor over the last 60 years since it's been running, I think 50 or 60 years. Long time for a TV show.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. So kind of transitioning from, acting now working as a puppeteer, how did that kind of come into play? Like were you a fan of the Muppets, or were you always fascinated by puppetry? Like
Well, it's kind of looking back at what I'd been doing. I did the kids show for 10 years and or it was perhaps 9 years, but anyway, it was around that time. And about halfway through it, I had a really a kind of, I won't call it a breakdown, but I had a kind of thing about, did I really want to be doing this? Why aren't I doing some acting and all that stuff, which a lot of puppeteers who have been actors go through. Anyway, I then from that point on, I realized what a talent I had for it and what a skill it was to have to be able to do this, and to do it on TV and film is an added skill, really. Um, So I then began to kind of value what I was doing. But then when I got to the end of this series, which was around about 1980, I questioned whether I really wanted to perform at all. I just thought maybe it's not really what I want to do. And you get to the age of about 30 and you think, oh, maybe I'm going to make a change here before I do, before I get too old. And so I started trying to become a producer at that point. And someone I'd been working with on the kids series had written some children's books and had them published, a series called Haggerty Haggerty. And we did a kind of, I got a deal with one of the British commercial companies. So this is a preschool children's program, and it's basically an actor telling a story, and then there's illustrations, very simple stuff, but it kind of promoted the books. And so I produced 2 series of that for this company. And when I got to the second one, I looked around the people who were working in the company and I thought, do I really want to be like these people here at the moment? No, I thought, well, maybe I don't. Maybe it's all too difficult to work in an office, when I've been doing all kinds of different things in the past. So I decided not. And I had about 2 or 3 years where I kind of thrashed around. And then I decided that I would go back to performing. And they were just, I know, looking for puppeteers for the second series of Spitting Image. And the Spitting Image was a satirical show, a puppet show in the UK from I think it was about 1983 to 1996. That was another long-running show that I got, which was 13 years I did on that. Now, so these were caricatures of politicians and famous people. So I started work on that. I went for an audition on that because I just thought I've got to do something. So I'm going to be broke. So I got this job by doing an audition again, and I went in to see that the producer, who was John Lloyd, who was quite a famous BBC producer here, has been in the past. Anyway, it was a one-to-one meeting with him, and he handed me the puppet of the Queen, and he said, "Can you do something with the Queen?" It was quite clear he didn't know what he was doing because he had never done an audition for puppeteers before, and neither did I. I wasn't expecting to have to do this, so I put the puppet on my hand, and it's a big puppet. I mean, it's almost life size, and all I could think of was the character I'd been playing in the kids' show, which had a voice like that. It was a silly little voice, and I did this voice for the Queen. I don't know why I did it, but it looked crazy. So he liked it, that it was looking crazy. And I did a poem, I think, and he gave me the job immediately. So that started me on the road to that. And we had learnt a lot from Henson's being next door about technical production, about physical production. Because when we were working originally, we worked on the floor, which is a little bit how Sesame Street does it. You've seen Sesame Street, obviously, and
Yeah.
they have basically the puppeteers sit on rolly chairs and roll themselves around.
Right.
Well, we didn't have that luxury, so we were working flat on the floor. Puppets couldn't move; they were always behind something, and we had one human presenter in it, and he could move around. So then Jim moves in to do the Muppet Show mid 70s, and they were playing everything up in the air, of course. So they were all standing up with the puppets above their head, and the sets all raised by about 2'6", something like that. So suddenly, our producer had been in the studio watching what they were doing. He gets the idea we could do this too. So we then have a new set built up, and that was fine. And so when we came eventually to do Spitting Image, everything was done in that way because Louise was on the series at the beginning as a consultant and as a performer, and she kind of gave them the idea of playing everything in the air. Also, Peter Harris, who was one of the directors of the Muppet Show, he was the first director on Spitting Image, so he, was used to working in that way with Jim. So, from that moment onwards, everything was generally played in the air, which made it easier for us, but more difficult for the actors, of course. However, in Spitting Image, of course, it was all puppets, so we didn't have to worry about actors. But that was that I did for about 13 years. And while I was working on that, we had an actor, a puppeteer from America, funnily enough, who was Anthony Asbury.
Oh yeah, I love Anthony. Yeah.
You know Anthony? Okay, so Anthony came in
Oh
and
yes, love
he was
Anthony.
he probably did about the first 7 or 8 years of the series, maybe a bit longer. So I got to know Anthony really well, and he was cast in Labyrinth. This is
Yes.
1985, I think it was. He got cast in Labyrinth, and he said to me, "Do you want to come and work on the movie?" So I said, "Oh, well, okay. Why not? I'm not doing anything." I couldn't do it all because I think we were still doing things at Spitting Image at the time. And because he and I were the kind of principal players then, we couldn't both just leave them in the lurch. So I did get to do some of it. And we did a long training workshop at the beginning about using animatronics and things like that. I think that was a little bit of a casting session too, but eventually I did do some work on the film. That again was shot at Elstree, which was just north of London. And I think, well, it was the summertime. I remember it was summer, and we went into that. I think we did. I shot for a week on a sequence called Dance the Magic Dance, which was when he throws the baby in the air, when David Bowie throws the baby in the air. And
yeah.
Yeah.
He was great actually, because given the fact that when you're shooting a movie with puppets, you're constantly having to go back and do things again because of people's heads coming into shot or something gets seen. And particularly in those days, it wasn't quite so easy to remove stuff because it was all shot on film. And if nowadays, because it's all digital, you can fix things quite easily in a frame. But then you couldn't do that so easily. So a lot of the time you go back and you do it again. And he wasn't really familiar with film. He'd done some filming. I think he'd done The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think, before that. But he was great in understanding where we were and how we were doing things. So yeah, that took us a week to shoot. And then the other couple of things I did, I think there's a scene where there are about 6 or 7 goblins' faces all
Yes.
hacking into the frame, where he's saying, they're saying, "Oh, go and say it,"
Yeah.
something like that. I think I was doing one of the goblins in that sequence.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
And then a lot of stuff at the end of the movie where there's a battle.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was a huge, huge set. It was the Goblin City, and it was on the Star Wars stage at Elstree, which was one of at the time, not the biggest, but one of the biggest stages in the UK. And
Nice.
they'd shot Star Wars there at the same studio. So
Wow.
they had built this stage. It's now, I think it's called the George Lucas stage now. It's still there. And well, at least a version of it is. And when we had the rap party for Labyrinth, we had it on this set, and they had 2 bands playing, but it was so big you couldn't hear one band from one end of the stage to the other because the set was in the way, all the Goblin streets, and it was fantastic. It was that's what I love about the kind of films that I've been involved with is the sets are always so fantastical, and they're so beautifully done, and you're in a completely different world, for a day.
Oh yes, Labyrinth is such a wonderful
It's a
movie.
great
We
film.
actually got to watch that actually not too long ago. It was so fun.
Yeah,
It was so fun watching it.
it is, and of course it's become a classic. I don't think it was hugely successful when it actually was first released, but since then, of course, people go back to it and see it again and again, and I think it really, it is a great movie. There's lots in it. There's so much in it. You can see different things all the time.
Absolutely.
Of course. So now, over the years, you got to work on a number of Henson projects, with one of the earliest being The Tale of the Bunny Picnic.
Yes.
What was it like getting to working on that?
That was a lot of fun to do. I think I think it was shot in about a week, I think. Um, Again, that was shot at Elstree, the same stages. Jim used to like working there. Uh, uh, there are many more film studios actually. But there were two film studios. There were two studios there at the time. One of which was a television studio, which is where he made the Muppet Show, and I did Pipkins. And then there was the film studios, which is over the road, which is where he shot Labyrinth and I think that. Yeah, there was the Dark Crystal too. They shot that there as well. I wasn't involved with that, but Labyrinth, that was the first thing I did for them, really. And so we were now in the television studios doing the Bunny Picnic, and there was a lot of running around the studio. I remember loads of us all. There was quite a lot of people there running around the studio. I don't remember that much about it, to be absolutely honest. I do have a couple of pictures of it, but it was very difficult to take photos in these days because they didn't like you taking pictures on the set, and of course you didn't have camera phones then, and eventually you got some kind of tiny cameras like little digital cameras. They eventually appeared, but any kind of camera that you couldn't really smuggle it in. And of course, I never took any pictures. That's what I'm saying anyway. So I do have a few pictures of Bunny Picnic, but I don't think I took them. I think somebody else took them, and I can't remember who it was because I think they're kind of group shots of lots of puppeteers all huddling together, each with a bunny on their hand. But it was a lot of fun doing, and Jim directed it, so it was good to be there doing, as with Labyrinth, those are the last two things he did, I think. Maybe wrong there. I don't know. Someone can correct me. But, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah, that Bunny Picnic was 86. I see. Yeah, we did the Bunny Picnic in 86, and we also did Little Shop that year too.
Nice.
Yeah, that was Little Shop was not Henson's, but nearly all of the puppeteers, of course, were everyone that was working for Henson's, and Brian Henson was one of the plant operators, and that was shot at Pinewood. And I worked briefly on that. I did about 3 days on that because we would do it. Anthony Asbury was also one of the main plant operators because he'd done the show in the West End and on Broadway, I think, and so I couldn't. They were constantly phoning up saying, "Can you do this day? Can you do that?" And I just had to say no because I was doing Spitting Image. Again, that was the same thing. But I did do a little bit of Mean Green Mother from Outer Space, which I played a pod, and it was the ones that go ah, and then Mean and Green. I think I had to do at this huge thing, this huge plant. All with these tiny pods that came into shot, and I was standing to one side of the shot with two huge levers that went to the floor, and when you squeeze them together, it opened the mouth of this pod and shut. And there must have been 50 of us working on this plant, and it was shot at half speed because it's a really fast sequence, as you know, if you've seen the film. So we shot the whole thing at half speed. So the whole thing was like that. Mean Green Mother from outer space. It was very slow. And then they speeded it up in the final film.
Interesting.
So it was good.
Interesting. So our other co-host, Matt Bingle, is here. I'll bring him in.
Tension is intense. We're waiting to him to arrive. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Very good, thank you.
Good.
I'm just talking about the movies, really, kind of movie stuff that I've been doing.
Very nice. Very nice.
Absolutely.
because the next thing was Muppet Christmas Carol,
Ah, yes.
which
Love,
was
love the Muppets Christmas Carol. Love that movie.
Yeah,
it's an extraordinary movie, and in fact, teachers have said to me, if they are recommending kids to watch any Dickens, that is the best version, because a lot of not all, but a lot of Gonzo's dialogue is straight from the book. It's actually it sticks really close to the book as well, apparently. Of course, there's no Rizzo the Rat in the book, but I think the pairing of Dave and Steve there doing
Yeah.
characters is just extraordinary, and it lifts the whole movie. Their reaction, their rapport that they had together. My job mainly on that was doing second unit stuff with the second unit director Nick Willing. So I did a lot of penguins, I know, in the street scenes. We did a sequence with the rats clearing up Scrooge's office,
Oh yeah.
yes. Which I think there is a song on that. It's maybe one more song for Christmas. I don't know. Anyway, it is the sequence where they kind of clear things up before they go off for Christmas. And I also remember doing a lot of walking up and down the streets behind Michael Caine, doing the songs where there's a couple of songs where he does the streets. He walks around the streets. Well, the whole thing was on C Stage at Shepperton Studios, and they built the street set, and the street set is built with a forced perspective, which means all the houses at the back are smaller than the ones at the front to make it look bigger. And all of it built 2'6" or 3 foot off the ground. So all of the floors in the streets were rostrum that they bought, and they made them all removable. So that any place on the street, you could pull out the floor and create a hole for the puppeteers to stand in on the studio floor, and then all the actors would stand, on the rostrum 3 foot above the ground. And so we would be walking up and down these trenches that they created in the floor just by removing some rostrums. It was midsummer and it was really hot. And it wasn't so bad for us because we could be in our shirt sleeves, but all the dancers in those sequences were all in winter clothes. And in those days, they didn't have cool lights. They had hot lights. So it was, for them, it was really unpleasant, the actors that appeared in it. But no, that was, and the other thing that I do remember doing in that was there's a final shot around the table where there's about 50 Muppets, I think, and the camera pulls back. Scrooge is sitting at the head of the table. Camera pulls back, and you see all the characters, and then it zooms out the window, and it's off over the rooftops. So I was doing Beaker in that shot. I remember that, just over Michael Caine's shoulder, over his left shoulder.
Nice.
So I do remember some things, I can. And if going back to Labyrinth, I could point out the character I was doing in the background of of Dance the Magic Dance, but I couldn't tell you who he is or what he looked like. But once I see the film, I can see him. So I did that shot. Funnily enough, I did a similar shot at the end of Labyrinth, because there's a pull out there again, on the bed in the bedroom, I think.
Yeah.
And they pull out, and she's sitting on the bed with Sir Didymus next to her, and the pull out with all the puppets. I was doing Sir Didymus at that point, because Dave Goles, who was playing the character, had to go back to the States to do something there. I think we must have overrun, and so he got double booked. And so as it was this one shot with the puppet sitting on the bed, he'd gone back to the US by then, and so I did Sir Didymus for him.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was. I've just made some notes here. I'm just looking at my notes, so I didn't forget anything. Yeah. Well, I did. So I did the Christmas Carol, and that was great to do. As I said, that was 92. Shot that in 92, and then Treasure Island came in 1995.
Yes. Love Treasure
Yeah,
Island.
that's
That's a
another
great
wonderful
one.
movie.
That was
Yes.
fantastic. Yeah, it was a great movie. And crazy. It was absolutely crazy because again they built these huge sets. They built the ship, the Hispaniola, I think it's called, and they built it. I don't know what the scale was, but it's probably something like 2/3 size. So there was this huge ship at one end of the studio, and it was on a gimbal, so the whole thing moved. They could move it virtually in any way they liked. But what they'd forgotten is that some people aren't very good sailors. So we got all these puppeteers on board the ship, and we were doing the big number where they all it's a kind of fantasy number, and I don't know how many of us there were on board this ship, but suddenly the whole thing starts to move like it's a real ship, and at least 2 or 3 of them had to get off because they couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. They'd have been throwing up, which is something you don't want to do when you've got a puppet in your hand. So that was very realistic. Actually, it was realistic, and I won't name the people who got off because it's that would be naming and shaming. But it's not. It wasn't a shame. It was sad that they couldn't do it. But again, all the sets on that were fantastic. Can I remember doing on that? I did the there was one sequence when the inn is burning. They burned down the inn sort of about 20 minutes into the movie, I think, the old inn. And that was a fantastic set because they built the whole inn on this stage, and they built the exterior, which was supposed to be kind of on a cliff top. So it looked very kind of on a cliff toppy thing. They built the exterior, and they also built the interior. So we shot actually inside this set. And one of the sequences was a black dog running through the building while it was on fire. And they said to me, "Would you do this?" Well, I'd never done any stunts before. And so I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do it." So then they showed me what I had to get into, the fire protection stuff, because there was a lot of fire around the set. I mean, it was safe, to be absolutely honest, but something had gone wrong. I could have caught on fire. So so I did this shot, and they cut it from the movie.
Oh wow.
My only stunt.
Oh,
I did do a bit of Black Dog later, actually, because his head punches through the roof at one point, comes through on the outside, and that was me doing that. I had to
Nice.
punch through the roof with the puppet. Yeah, it was pretty
Nice.
strange doing things like that. But it was a great movie, and
Oh
they
yeah.
had they had the tank, a huge tank of water. So yeah, it was good, very good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now you also perform Mew in The Secret Life of Toys. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I did. I didn't do there was a kind of a one-off that they did, which I think Steve Whitmire played Mew in, but I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, love Steve.
Yeah, Steve's a great guy. Well, anyway, yeah, yeah. I think he did Mew, and I don't know why he didn't do it in this particular thing, but we were shooting in Germany. I don't know quite why we were. It was probably to do with finance. So we shot that in Germany, in Cologne, just outside Cologne, and we were there for 3 months. And that's where I got to know Dave Goals really well, because he was playing Rugby Tiger, and we were kind of a sort of a double act. And Jerry Nelson, who was playing the bear. And Louise was there, Louise Gold. She came. We were all in Germany for 3 months, so we really had time to get to know each other because we were all staying at the same hotel, and it's important, I think, when you're doing something like that, that you do really have a chance to make a good team. And
Right.
that was what we got then, really, was the chance to make a really good team there. So and Dave and I have stayed good friends ever since. You know, and Debbie, his wife, was there. We also got to know Debbie really well. So yeah, it was good. It was a very good time, and we had, and there was, I think it was Mike Quinn, who was also there full time, and somebody else. There were a couple of German puppeteers too, who I guess again we probably had to have. You know, it was really good. I mean, they were good. It was good to have them there. But very often when you do things in different countries, part of the deal is to get your tax breaks that you have to employ, you know, certain people of the nation that you're in. And that's certainly, I've been that myself, which I'll explain later. But yeah, so yeah, it was a very good experience. And I think the shows are good, actually. The shows look really nice. There's a lot of, it was a kind of time when people were becoming more aware of things like showing kids swords and knives and things like that. And there'd been a lot of talk about it. And I think there was I think there may have been a storyline where we were pirates or something like that. And suddenly Disney was saying you can't have a sword in these characters' hands and so forth. I think we did suffer a little bit from that, but it wasn't a problem for the show. But it was just interesting to observe that, you know, around that time people started to become aware of the influence of children's television, I think, which is great. Oh, and one of the things I didn't say about the original show, and this is, you know, will come up in a minute, is that the original show I did for Pipkins back in the 70s was inspired by Sesame Street being made. Sesame Street had started, I think, in the late 60s or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, 69.
Yeah, and the authorities here had seen it and wanted something similar for a similar age group, because at that point we had no daytime TV here. So there was a little bit in around lunchtime and a little bit around 5 o'clock, but there was no daytime TV. I mean, I can't imagine it now, you know, because there's so many channels and everything. And you already had, in the US, you had channels all the time, but we had no daytime TV. So we were breaking new ground. And it was because of Sesame Street that we were kind of commissioned to address that audience of preschoolers. So, which is kind of current about what we're talking about, because, you know, I did some work for Sesame Street International around this time too.
Oh yeah, nice.
It was 1990. Oh, around about 1995, I think, that I got approached through Henson's to help them set up Sesame Street in Russia.
Ooh, nice.
Things were fairly recent. Glasnost had happened fairly recently before this, so things had changed dramatically there. So it was my job to go over and cast the show with the puppeteers and then train them to use the Henson style puppets. And it was quite an experience. I was there for 10 days in all, and the auditions were quite long because there was a lot of people wanted to do this, and there were a lot of people who felt they should do it even if they didn't really want the part. They would turn up at because there's quite a tradition of puppetry in Russia, so they felt if they hadn't been seen, it would be a knock to them. So a lot of them came in and they had no intention of doing the show, but they just came and wanted to do the audition so that they could, you know, say they'd been there. Anyway, it was a really interesting experience. And I will tell you now, Natasha Lance-Rogoff, who was the woman who created it and made it happen. It took her 5 years to get it off the ground. So she'd been working on it for 5 years before I came on the scene, and I was in the very last little bit. She's written a book about it. and it's called Muppets in Moscow. So
yeah.
I recommend you read it because it's a fascinating story, because it involves all kinds of things like murders and I mean, you wouldn't believe what it took to get the Sesame Street on in Russia. But she's great, and she was just wonderful, and she wrote down everything at the time, but she's only just written the book because but she kept kind of a lot of it all written down. She wrote down everything, and it's a fascinating read, so please read it if you can.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I did that for them. I did Poland as well. I did the same thing in Poland. Why I've been doing this in the first place is because the Russians wanted to do the show, I think in January. They wanted to shoot in January, which meant that we had to do the casting and training in December. Not the best time to be in Moscow, I can tell you. But they had to do it then, and that is the time that they record, or did at the time, they recorded Sesame Street in New York. So normally one of the guys from New York would have gone and done this, but they couldn't because they were doing the show for the US.
Right.
So that was my gain, because I benefited from that. And also a little while later, a few months later, Poland came up. And so I went twice to Poland and did the same job there, which was really good. Then slightly more difficult was Palestine and Israel, which I had to cast the Palestinian segment. The Israeli show had been running for about 20 years, I think, for some time anyway. But they wanted to insert a Palestinian segment into it to kind of try and show people living together, different differences living together. And that was the idea. So I went there to do that, and that was quite an experience, because there's always a tension there, with I had to go through a checkpoint every day to work where they had guns, and that wasn't too pleasant, especially coming from the UK where we don't have guns, really, not much anyway. That was fascinating, but so I did that. I also did one in Spain, and I did some work on the German version through Peter Lintz.
Peter, love
Peter's
Peter.
wonderful.
I love Peter so much.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
He's a great guy, and I hadn't met Peter,
yeah.
but he was normally handling the German version, but again, for some reason, he wasn't able to go and do this. It was a recast, I think, for one of the characters. So for whatever reason, he couldn't make it. So never met him. He'd never worked on any of the stuff over here at that point, as far as I know, anyway. And he called me up to explain, what was needed, and gave me a bit of history on the whole show, and how and what he wanted me to do, and so forth. So that was great, and it was nice to talk to him. But that was a phone call that I'd had. So and that was it. And I went and did the job, and it was, as far as I know, it was all fine. So that was good. Anyway, jumping forward a little bit, and we'll probably, this is going slightly out of sequence, but jumping forward a little bit, when Cameron Mackintosh was going to bring Avenue Q to London, Peter, at the time, Peter was the puppet coach on the Broadway version. And Cameron said to Peter, who can you recommend to do the training of the UK version? So very fortunately, I was almost the only person he knew that was in the UK and that had done training for the Muppets, So I had done some workshops with Kevin Clash as well at that point. And
Kevin, love Kevin.
I watched your session with Kevin the other day.
Oh, really?
That's great.
That's wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah,
love that guy.
I've stayed in touch with Kevin. We speak about once a month now. So
that's
great. That's awesome.
We worked together on Treasure Island because I was his assistant. He was puppet captain at the time, and I helped him. I assisted him. So So we got to know each other really well then, although I'd worked with him on Labyrinth, but it was much more at a distance at that point. So yeah, so it was nice that Peter suggested me, and I did get the job, but it wasn't quite as simple as that. But there was a little story attached to that, which I can tell you if we've got time when I come to it. But yeah, that was Peter's, my introduction first to Peter, and I didn't actually get to meet him and work with him until Muppets Most Wanted, which was 2013.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
The last
Yes.
movie. Yeah. But no, that was good. So, but I did the Sesame Street stuff and worked with a lot of great people. Josh Selig, Josh was on the, well, he's a writer basically, who is now a producer. I don't know if you know Josh. Do you know of him?
A little bit,
Yeah.
yeah. He created some shows
Mhm.
like Wonder Pets and Ooby, a lot of wonderful
Yeah.
children's
Well,
shows.
Ubi,
A lot of terrific shows here.
Yeah, I think Ubi wasn't Ubi the where he had eyeballs on a.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
He got that from watching me do my workshop, because we used that in the workshop. You know, we used these eyeballs on the hands sometimes to strip back the characters. You know, rather than have a puppet on, you put eyeballs on a piece of elastic, and they sit on the top of the hand, and then you can have a very simple. Which is exactly what he did with the show. I've never seen it, but he was talking about it at the time, and he came to me and said, "I've had this idea for a show," he said, and then he said, "I've been watching you do these workshop sessions with the eyeballs." He said that would make a great show, and so he then took that and into Ubi, and he's done several things with his company, Little Airplane, ever since, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was great to work with, Kathy Chilko and Natasha Lance Rogoff. They were all producers from Sesame Street who worked on the various international versions that I did.
That's cool. Nice.
Really good, very good experience.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, and yeah, Avenue Q is such wonderful
Yeah,
Broadway. It's so great.
Yeah.
it is. Well, there's a bit of a story that I have attached to that. The whole thing was that I got a phone call from Cameron McIntosh's office via Equity, you know, because they didn't have my number. But I'm a member of British Equity, which is the Actors Union, and they got in touch with Equity, and so Equity said, "Cameron McIntosh is trying to get in touch with you." I thought, "Oh Jesus, what's that about?" You know, that came completely out of the blue. But I had heard of Avenue Q. I didn't know the show, bearing in mind it hadn't been here. I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't really know the show at all. And so my immediate thought was, oh God, I hope he's not going to ask me to be in it. You know, clearly I couldn't be, because I'm far too old for doing the show. I mean, I found that out later, of course, but that was my initial thought. Anyway, I eventually get a phone call from Thomas Schoenberg, who is the producer of the show here in London. And he says to me, "Can you come and talk to us? You've been recommended to be our puppet coach here." So I said, "Oh, fine, okay, yeah." So I go in, I talk with Evan Ensign, who is also the second. He's the assistant director, and from the Broadway show, who came over here to help Jason Moore get the show on here. So they then offer me the job ultimately. Okay, they say you could you do that for us? So okay, I did. We started the casting sessions in the autumn of 2005. So that was a fairly elaborate casting. We did fairly extensive workshops with groups of people. I didn't actually get to see them until they'd gone through the singing auditions first. So they did the singing auditions, and then there was a short list of those that could sing the show. None of them had puppet experience at all, which actually probably at the end of the day might have been a boon, because we were wanting to teach them a very specific style of which, you know, if you've seen the show, you know what the style is. And sometimes people without any baggage, you know, can be easier to teach. So we cast the show, and then they didn't have an opening date. And at that point, one of the guys who used to work for Henson's got in touch with me and said, I'm doing a series in Australia called 5 Minutes More, and we'd like you to play one of the characters. And so I said, when is it? And they said, well, it's whenever it was in May, I think, or April, and April through till June, something like that. And I said, well, I've just been offered this job, and I just need to check with Cameron Mackintosh first. So I go back to Cameron Mackintosh. Have you got the date for the show yet? No, we haven't got the date. So, oh God. So anyway, I tried to push it as long as I could. And then came January, I think, of the year, the relevant year. And the producer for 5 Minutes More said to me, look, I've got to have your decision now, because we've got to do something if you don't want to do it. So I then phoned Cameron Mackintosh. Have you got a date? No, we haven't. Okay, I took the gamble. I signed the contract for the Australian job. 2 days later, Cameron Mackintosh phones up and says, right, we got a date. And it clashed, of course. It clashed right at the end of the rehearsal period, and it was virtually in Australia. So, but that time I had to say to them, I can't do it. I could do it from this date, but I can't do it before. So I set off for Australia, and I'm in Australia. And of course, the time difference between there and here is pretty great, probably the same as it is for you, more or less. So it's very difficult to be able to talk to someone. It's either late at night or early in the morning. And they suddenly went dead on me. I didn't hear a thing from them. I learned afterwards that they were trying to get somebody else to do it, but they couldn't find anyone. And Evan, who was the assistant director, really wanted me to do it. So because we'd already done the sessions, earlier in the year before. So in the end, they said, "Oh, okay, well, will you do the job? But we'll have to get someone to cover for you in the rehearsal period."
Nice.
So they got Peter Lintz to come over, and with Amy, I can't remember her surname. Sorry, Amy. But Amy came over, I think, for part of the time, and she was also doing the show in New York. And Peter did the first bit, and so they both.
You mean Amy Garcia?
Amy Garcia. It could have been Amy Garcia. I think it was. I didn't want to say that because I'm not 100% sure, but I think anyway. She did the handover to me when basically it was when we were starting to get into the theatre, and so I did that job for about. Actually, I'm still doing it off and on. If there's a tour happens here in the UK, which it often does, we did it in the West End for 4.5 years, I think, and then I've been doing it off and on over the last 16, 17, 18 years, something like that, I think. What was it? 20? Oh, no, it's nearly 20 years now. So I've had a lot of long runs at jobs. So I've been very lucky. Good show, though. It is a great show.
Yes.
I love it.
Absolutely.
I've seen it at least 250 times. So I'm glad it wasn't a tragedy.
So now, years later, which of course you can mention a little tiny bit. You also got to puppeteer on the film Muppets Most Wanted. What was that like?
Yeah, but it was great. It was good to do. It was quite hard work because I was mainly working with Bill Beretta.
Bill, yes, love Bill.
It's lovely Bill, lovely guy.
Yes, he is.
I was his assistant in this one, setting up, but mainly my job was casting all the background action and making sure there were people there every day, and also covering, because on the movies, generally, that's what I've been doing, is covering, doing various bits of, for all the main characters, for it. Not so much on Christmas Carol, but by the time we got to Treasure Island, I was doing all the stuff like remotes on Kermit, because there was a sequence where they are hanging, he and Miss Piggy are hanging off a rock upside down on the end of a rope, and that was a remote head on that, on those characters. They were both radio controlled, and in the long shots where they were not doing very much, I was doing the remotes on that. I also did when Steve was doing Kermit in the fight. There's one shot which almost goes by without you noticing it, but was probably the most difficult shot on the movie, which is him doing jumps. He had to do two loops, and then end up with a sword. And it was done against green screen. So Steve was standing behind the puppet, operating the puppet, and he was doing it to a count. So this he had to hit the ground at certain points and bounce off again, and then again. And I don't think he was actually moving. I think he was doing it on the same spot. I can't remember that quite. And they were going to move the background, so which was already shot. So we did, and he had to hit the ground at a certain point and then spin off again. And it was on a rig, so he could do that, and the puppet would turn over, and then his feet would have to hit the ground. But of course, it relied on hitting it at the right angle. We did something like 95 takes on this. It took us a whole day to shoot it.
Wow.
I may be over egging that, but it was up in the 90s, I'm pretty sure. Afterwards, the director, David Lane, who was the second unit director on that, said to me there were about 3 takes that were usable because something just went wrong, and it had to be a smooth take. It had to all happen in one take, and I was doing the remote control head on that one, so
Nice.
that was extraordinary. The whole day we took doing the one shot. So yes, that's kind of what I was doing, doubling, and so animal and any of the puppets really that needed, where somebody else, one of the main players, whose character it was in the scene as the other character that they had. Then
Right.
I would stand in as well as some of my colleagues, and at the same time I was doing the casting. We shot some of that on an old US air base outside Oxford. This was supposed to be Siberia, I think, and it was a bit like Siberia at the time because it had snowed. I mean, it was perfect, really, and it was very unpleasant. That was the only thing about the movie I didn't like, was it was in the middle of winter we were shooting. Getting up in the dark and going home in the dark is just horrible, and especially when it's been snowing and you've got to get through all the snow and the slush but for shooting the Siberian scene, they probably had to augment it even so, but there was real snow on the ground at that point, and it was so cold, so that wasn't too pleasant. But suddenly I got a phone call saying we need someone back at Pinewood at the studios to do this second unit stuff. I'll come, I said, don't worry. So I got to be in the warm.
Nice.
Yeah, no, it was good to do. It was very good to do. We did a lot of location shooting there, but also they built huge sets again in the studio. There's a sequence towards the end where Kermit and Piggy are getting married in a church, big church, or it's supposed to be the chapel at the Tower of London, and they built that whole church on the stage because it's all had to be built 3 foot off the ground. And I had to find 50 puppeteers for that because it's not easy to do, I can tell you, because they wanted to shoot. If you look at the shots with where you can see the congregation, we shot it in 2 halves. We had 50 puppeteers on one side, and then they moved across to the other side and they reshot the sequence with them on the other side. So we had it looks like there were about 100 different puppets there. But in actual fact, it was 2 lots of 50. But it's a lot of people to get to try and find.
I can imagine, yeah.
And they also built the roof of the Tower of London in one of the stages, because all the sequences you see on the roof of the tower, they couldn't use the real tower because getting a crew and a unit up there the fragile building would not have taken the weight. So what they did was they built the roof. It's slightly smaller than the actual tower, but not much. And so it was a huge set and surrounded it with a blue screen. And then they took the cameras up onto the roof of the tower and shot the backgrounds for live of what you could see from the tower. But also, they sneaked in a couple of features that you can't see from the roof of the tower. They said because they were things that people who knew London would know that these sites, but they were actually further down the river. They brought them up and put them so you could see them from the tower. But their logic was that nobody ever can get on the roof of the Tower of London, so nobody would know that you can't see these things from there. So that's a composite shot in the background whenever you see the tower. Brilliantly done though. I mean, it all looks great. The helicopter and everything. Yeah, great. Good fun to do.
Yes, wonderful movie.
Yeah.
Great movie. So moving on from the movies, you puppeteered Moosey Mouse, Lamont the Sloth, and many other characters on the series Mopatop Shop.
Yeah.
Well, can you talk about working on that? Because that was based in the UK. I don't remember if we got it here. Did we?
I don't think it did. It was made by Henson's
Mm-hmm.
at I think ITV here, which is one of the independent stations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you can see it on the Hensons. Hensons have got clips from it, I think, on their channel.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, my main character was Moosey Mouse, which was this big, I think, something like that. He was one of the mice in Christmas Carol. If you know
Oh,
the shot
wow.
where there's some little mice living in the wall of one of the houses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was one of those puppets, and it was, I think, probably one of the most exquisite puppets that I've ever operated, because he was just beautiful. He had been engineered. He wasn't a glove puppet. He was rod. So he was, as I said, he was about that big. So you couldn't get your hand into him. And he was engineered inside so that I had a control on a stick. And he had an arm rod in the usual way that puppet has. But everything else was done with a trigger and a rocking device that was just above my trigger finger. So his mouth was operated with a trigger. And then I could move his head virtually in any way by doing this, using this kind of rocking control. But not only that, when he opened his mouth, inside the head the engineering was so good that he didn't actually just open the bottom jaw. He actually opened both jaws, and to a slightly different degree, because everybody uses a little bit of upper lip, but it just gave you enough upper lip to make it look real. And then the most of the work was done with the bottom jaw. I don't know how they did it, but I'm not technical in that way. Yeah, I don't know how they did that, but it was a beautiful puppet to operate. And I had it for 2 years. We did the show, ran for 2 years.
Nice.
4 series, written and created by Jocelyn Stevenson, who
Yes.
Jocelyn,
yeah.
yes, love
one of
her.
the nicest people you could wish to meet.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and so she ran that show for 4 series over 2 years, and it was a very happy time. And I played Moosey Mouse, yeah, but there was a guest in every show, and we did 250 shows, I think. There was a guest in every show, and I think in 200 of them, I must have played the guest with a different voice for every character, I like to
Wow.
say.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I don't think I did, but it felt like it. It felt like it, and it was great fun to do, and a big challenge, to come up with a different character every time. Some great music too. That's one of the things about working on these shows, is that the musicians you get to work with, and creating these pieces are just wonderful, and having songs written for you, is something I didn't think about it at the time, but when I was doing it, but really when I look back, it was just fantastic that they had all this music written especially for you, and written how you performed, because they got to know you over the period, when you're working a lot. Mopatop Shop, have a look for bits of it. Some of it was pretty weird, actually. It was kind of off the wall stuff, that was created for preschool children. we had a lot of fun doing it. It wasn't in any way rude or anything, but it was just great. You know, it was very inclusive, I would say.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Mopatop Shop is a wonderful show. I've seen some episodes of it on the Jim Henson Company YouTube channel, like you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah,
Because they got a lot of shows on there that didn't air here.
yeah.
So that was kind of like my kind of exposure to some of those shows, and they're really wonderful shows. Because
Yeah.
we got a lot of wonderful shows by the Henson Company
Yeah.
out here, but you know, the UK too. There are a lot of wonderful shows out there.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
as I understand it, that when the Muppet Show first happened, Jim had tried to get the idea off the ground in the US for some time. He'd been hawking the show around, and nobody was interested. They said it wouldn't work. And I'm not sure how it happened, but he got to talking to Lou Grade, who was the owner of ATV, which was the company that eventually made it. He got to talking to him, and he persuaded him to. I mean, basically, it was a fairly open, bottomless purse, as I understand it. You know, they had a very big budget. He said, you know, just make the shows and make them good. And the first series were all relatively low. The famous people in it were kind of not exactly B-list, but they weren't the top celebrities at the time. But once it had aired, and it aired in the States, which I think it was syndicated, and I'm not totally sure what that means, frankly, because I don't totally understand the system that you have there. But I understand it did go across the whole country, and he was the one that kind of had the faith in Jim. That's why he kind of set up here, really, initially, because when he did the Muppet Show, he had to set up a workshop in the UK to be able to create the puppets and service the puppets. So he opened a workshop in Hampstead, which is in North London, and it was just opposite his house, actually, where he was living, because he bought a house here. He was here for so long. They were here for 4 or 5 years, I think, doing that, and then other film projects afterwards. So and eventually, I think it was Brian who set up the Creature Shop, which was a much bigger affair and was designed to do movies and create animatronics for movies. And I did a couple of movies with them. I did Lost in Space, which was here. I was doing the robot. I had to say, "Danger, Will Robinson, danger," which is a kind of famous line from Lost in Space. You obviously don't know the series. Anyway, I did that, and I did Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was also one of their movies, and commercials. They did a lot of commercials, and that was all set up. They set the company up here, probably late 90s, something like that, around the mid to late 90s, and they were making things for other movies as well. But so often you'll see Jim Henson's Creature Shop credited when there's been some kind of creature in the piece. But yeah, there were a lot of shows that were made for foreign countries as well, other countries. But he shot a lot here because I think once Lou Grade had backed him, he liked the way that he could work here, and there was the money. I think there was the money was available, which is very often the most important thing. When I was telling you about the Avenue Q story about the Australian thing, because I knew we were going to revoice the whole show when we got back to London, I said to them, could I take the last 3 weeks off and get somebody to cover for me, because I'm going to revoice it anyway. Even though it was my own voice, I was still going to do it. They said, no, you can't do that, because you are part of the tax breaks that we got to coming here. So if we send you home, we don't get the tax break. So I must have been very valuable to them, obviously, in relation to the tax.
Nice. So you also lent your voice to Tungar the Tiger in the Sesame Street Outreach spinoff Panwapa. What was that like?
I did. That was great. I think that came about because they'd originally Marty Robinson had originally voiced.
Marty,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and I know Marty really well
He's
because
great.
yeah, Marty came to work on Spitting Image, so I got to know him really well. And he used to stay
Hmm.
with me. Yeah, he'd voiced the character originally, but somebody then pointed out that this was the time when everyone was getting very sensitive about accurate voices. So there was, I think somebody else was playing an Indian character, and they felt that had to be dubbed as well by an actual Indian voice. And Tungar was supposed to be a British kind of tiger, and so they really felt they should, because this was an international project. I think that was the other thing. It wasn't just for the US, it was an international thing. They really wanted to revoice it. So I did that down the line from London. I went into a vocal booth here, and they played me the series from probably Los Angeles. I'm not quite sure where. It may have been New York, but I was talking to somebody down the line and dubbing the whole thing, the whole series. So I think that took me a couple of days to do. I think I can't remember, but it was really nice, and nice to see Marty's work as well. So, and I hope I did him justice. But yeah, that was a very interesting project for me to do that down the line.
Oh yeah.
I've done a little bit of voice work as well. I did some work on Harry Potter. It was called The Philosopher's Stone here. I can't remember what they changed the title for the US. It's the first one.
Oh, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I played the mountain troll who smashed up the girls' toilets. And it wasn't a lot of dialogue. It was a lot of ooh, and doing all of that. And I ended up with a wand up my nose, I think. Yeah, I did that, and I did some voices on Christmas Carol too.
Nice.
Background stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So Panwapa is even though that show was like of course short lived. It's a cool little neat show.
Yeah.
It's really awesome.
Yes. And
Yeah.
and you also puppeteered various characters on the show Bunnytown, where you played
Yes.
King Bunny, Little Bad Bunny, a bunch of other
Oh,
characters on that. What was it like working on that show?
that was fantastic. Again, it was very small puppets, a bit like Moosey Mouse. They were very small, and they were all on a trigger system, not quite as sophisticated as Moosey, but very great. And it was Dave Rodman's idea, and his baby and his production company that did it for Disney. And we shot that at Elstree too, and that was all miniature sets that they built. And I played Little Bad Bunny and King Bunny. Yeah, King Bunny was a bit stupid and talked like that, I think. I was going to remember. And Little Bad Bunny spoke with a very angry voice. He was just a nasty piece of work. It was quite good to play the villain, actually, because when you don't often get the chance to play the villain in kids shows.
Right, yeah.
So that was a bit of fun.
Nice. And all right, so this is kind of more of a deep cut question, but you also did a brief stint on Thomas and Friends, where you got to narrate the Rev W. Awdry's letter to his son.
Yeah, it was.
What was that? What was that job like?
Well, it really was very small. It was one of the
Yeah.
directors that I've been working with on Mopatop's shop. He came to me and said, I think it was for the US, actually. It was just went out in the US when the show went there. They wanted to kind of set the scene. And so I don't know what the visuals were, but there was a letter from the Reverend Awdry, which was the guy that originally created this back in probably the 1920s or something like that. I can't remember. But they wanted to have his voiceover over this letter, reading the letter, which was written to his son, which is who he'd written the stories for and where they first came from. Like a lot of these shows that you see, like it's people telling their kids stories at night, and then suddenly they realize they've got Roald Dahl tells that story famously about some of the stuff that he did, and And Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, for example, was first written for his kids. You know, he told that story. So it was very much that. And so I just did the voiceover for that. And Simon Spencer, who was the director and producer of that series, wanted to put that, or he'd been asked to put that on to the front of each of the shows, I believe. So I've never seen it, but I believe is it successful in the States? I don't know. Is it?
They made many different movies and specials and
Yeah.
spin-offs
Been
and
running a long time.
yeah, and still is.
Still is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, even though it's a kind of a little short thing, like you just doing that, because three of us, we grew up watching Thomas a lot, and just watching it itself, just brings
Yeah,
back
hearing
a
that at
lot of
like
memories.
hearing that at
Yeah.
like the beginning of each of the
Well,
episodes.
I think I believe they've gone to animation now, but it used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
did actually when around the time I was doing this, I went to, I think it was Shepperton that they shot it at, and I did go in and have a look at the layout that they had there. And of course, it was fantastic, the detail that they had on this layout and how they shot it with, having to, because they were relatively small, these trains, so the camera lens had to be really in a close position. And I'd seen it done before with a kind of periscope lens. I can't remember if they actually used that on this, but where they have a very long tube and the lens is at the end. Of course, nowadays they just have a GoPro or something like that and shove it on the train, and it would all be very easy. But we're talking, 20 years ago, there still wasn't the camera technology at that point to do that. So they still had the big cameras, but they put little lenses on them at the end of a long stick. But it was fascinating. It was really what they did with that show, and it's enormously popular around the world. Who doesn't love trains?
Right.
I still go on them if I can. If
Oh,
there's
yeah.
steam train somewhere, I'll always look.
It's nice.
Yes, love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love Thomas, especially just
Yeah.
watching that. It brings a lot of memories. Love
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Remember that?
Absolutely.
Remember that? Remember that a lot.
Yes.
So.
Yep.
I've also interestingly done some music videos too, a few music videos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Land of Confusion for Genesis. We did the video for that, which is puppets. So you should look it out on YouTube. It was done through Spitting Image. This was at the early days of Spitting Image. And they came to us and said, would you do the so there are all kinds of characters appearing in that, and that's quite interesting to watch. We used Sting's Every Breath You Take. Do you know the song?
Yep.
We used that for one episode of Spitting Image on the first series, the end of the first series, where Sting rewrote the music to make it reflect political leaders. And he re-sang the song for us, and it's quite impressive. Not readily available, I don't think, but if you get to see that, that's quite an interesting piece, if you know the history of the time, talking about 83. I did, for Moby, I did a video called Jam for the Ladies, which I did the Little Monkey, I think I did for that. And I did a live show with Gorillaz. Do you know Gorillaz? Damon Albarn, his group. It's a kind of animated.
I think so.
It's weird because it's in the videos normally they do it's animated. Their characters are animated, but they'd had these two of the characters made into puppets, life size, and we were in a theatre in Manchester, and we had one of the boxes on the side was just set for us, and two of the characters came, and while they were changing the set down below for various different numbers, we kind of took over, and but we couldn't speak, so we just appeared, and everybody went wild, when we came up. And so we started doing this kind of thing, getting the audience would go down, and then we bring them up again, and we play around with them like that without any dialogue. But that was a lot of fun. Very loud. Very loud. Any rock concert is, you know. Yeah, that was interesting doing that, doing all
Nice.
kinds of different stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about your work in the past, but can you share any projects that you're currently working on?
Well, the one that we have now that is current is a show called Monty and Co. And that's my own show. I produced it along with others, not on my own, but it's my own production and it's on the BBC here in the UK. We made 35 programs. Not sure if we're going to go to any more yet. We're still waiting to hear. Yeah, it was very interesting to do. And what we originally set out to do, and this took us a long time. Again, it's a sort of 5 or 6 year story. We set out to revive the original show that I did back in the 1970s called Pipkins. And the independent company here that now owns the rights to the show couldn't be sure that it owns the rights to the format, because we went to them and talked to them about it and they were interested, but then they did some research into their files. And because ATV, the company that had originally made it, had been sold several times over the ensuing years, because it was an independent producer, and bits of it had been sold off. So they couldn't be sure that they owned the format rights. And so we thought, well, we can't take the chance that, you know, you make the show and then somebody says, oh, I own the format to that, you can't show it. That would have been a big mistake. So we backed off from that and we created a new show for ourselves, which was kind of based along the lines of the original. So now it's there is a YouTube channel for Monty and Co. And there's some stuff on there. It doesn't show the programs yet, but eventually I'm expecting that the programs will be on YouTube as well. At the moment, it's online with the BBC, so you won't be able to get that in North America. But there are some things that you can see that we've created outside the program, outside the episodes, and basically it's aimed at preschool, so it won't be your age group, but it might be interesting for you to look at it and see. There's probably some clips online, I would think.
Nice.
But we financed that ourselves, and we and created it ourselves, and with a lot of very talented people, and who supported us, and you know, technicians as well as performers. It's done great. You know, we're very happy with it. It's done very well. So
Nice.
that's what I've kind of been working on at the moment, and that's taken full time. I do a little bit of training for Avenue Q now and again.
Awesome.
So that still rumbles on. I did a few bits of directing too for the theatre shows, really, which was I directed Louise Gold's one woman show. She did a one woman show for some time. That was great fun to do that. I love doing that. Dr. Dolittle, which was a musical based on the movie that Henson's did here. They created the animals for the London show. It's been done several other times since then, and that was interesting because they had £1 million budget to create these characters. And I think it was actually the whole show was 4 million or something like that, but they created some extraordinary things. You know, the creature shop, a parrot, fully operational radio controlled parrot, didn't fly, but it sat on a perch and it could talk. And Julie Andrews did the voice for that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she's great. She was lovely. And I did something similar for Peppa the Pig. Do you know Peppa the Pig?
Oh yeah.
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 Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah.
Very young children show where we did the live show for that for 4 years, I think, taking the West End and around theatres. Shaun the Sheep. I don't know if you've seen
Yes, love Shaun the Sheep.
Yeah.
Awdry animation. We did the live version of that for a while. So lots of interesting things, really. Yeah. I did
Nice.
the X Factor too. Do you know the X Factor? Do you have the X Factor there, or is it called something
Yeah.
else? Simon Cowell.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not too sure if
it was kind of short-lived, but we did have the X
Yeah,
Factor in
we
the
did.
US for
Yeah,
brief,
a little
Yeah.
for
bit,
like 2
little
or
bit.
3 seasons.
I
Yeah,
think that's it. It's basically a kind of I've never actually seen it, to be honest, but I did the show with Ollie Murs. I don't know. Do you know Ollie Murs?
Yeah.
You heard of him?
I've
Well,
heard
he
of
did
it. Yeah.
No.
So he said he wanted to do his latest single with the Muppets, and so they shipped all the characters over, and we just I think Eric was the only one that came over to do Miss Piggy, because there was a little bit of dialogue they wanted to do with that. But I was doing Animal with Mac Wilson, who was playing my hands, because it's a two-handed job. Animal's on the drums, and you know what he does there. So Mac was on his hands doing the drumming, because obviously I only had one hand then, and I was in the head, and I did the same thing with the commercial with a famous footballer called Thierry Henry. We did a commercial for cars, and it was Animal. He was drumming, and then Animal was next to him on a smaller set of drums, and they kind of did a drum off. It was great. It was a good commercial. That's on YouTube as well. Thierry Henry, and it was called Va Va Voom, and I can't remember. I think it's Renault cars. I think the French car maker. So that's quite a nice ad, actually. If you can see that, you should have a look.
Nice.
Yeah, lots of ads. I mean, there was a time when puppets were used in ads all the time over here, and in Europe as well. I did a lot of stuff in Europe. I spent 1 week a year in Rome, which was fantastic, to go and work somewhere like Rome every year for a week, and shoot commercial. Yeah, so it's been interesting.
Awesome.
Definitely. So the last question that Jake's about to ask is a question we ask all of our guests at the end. Go ahead, Jake.
Thank you, Chris. So, of course, this podcast is called Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. When you think of nostalgia, what do you think of? Or in your own words, how would you define the word nostalgia?
Funny enough, I've had the time to think about this, because I saw Kevin talking about it. So, well, I think sadly, that's probably me. I am nostalgia, and that's in what I did for my living. For a lot of people, I'm well aware that the stuff that I did over the last 50 years, which is how long I've been doing it, they become very nostalgic for. And it's really interesting to talk to the original audience who are now in their 40s and 50s, of the kids' stuff that I did back in the 70s, and getting a response from them and how much of an impression it's made. But it's also very nostalgic. So I think it's looking at something that reminds you of childhood, of the good times. That's kind of what nostalgia. None of you are old enough to really experience nostalgia yet. So you'll know what it is when it hits you. You probably are. You probably do. I mean, you probably look back at the kids' shows you used to watch, or the games you used to play that you don't do anymore. I think that's what it is for me. Is just the good times. They're all good times, mind you. They're just different.
Right, yeah. Great send on. Well, Nigel, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was a blast.
Pleasure. Good.
Yes. Yes. So thank you so much for what you've done over the years. Be what you've done, be part of our lives, and keep up with what you're doing now. And cannot wait what's next in store for you.
Good.
Also, very happy you enjoyed Kevin's episode. We really appreciate that.
I did enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you. It means a lot.
I will talk to him in the next few days, I suspect, and I'll say that I saw it. He's a great guy too. He's so easy.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of really interesting stuff, that to tell you. So that was really good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you done this with Bill Beretta?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Good. I thought I saw his name somewhere on your list.
Yeah, Bill's a great friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
he really is.
Well, keep in touch, Nigel. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll let you know when this goes up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, chaps. Nice to see you.
Yes, likewise.
Nice to see you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you, Nigel. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
It's goodbye from us as well. We absolutely enjoyed our time speaking with Nigel Plaskitt. Links to his website and his social media will be in the description down below for anyone who wants to connect with him or check out his work. but it's goodbye from us as well. And as always, what do we say, Jake?
Keep nostalgia alive. Take care, everyone. See you next time. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show interview. Be sure to follow Jake and the crew on social media and stream the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye.